And I forgot to change the subtitle here, but I will when I send it out. So, what brings on sleep the quickest for you? Hard day's work, hard day's fun, big meal, Bible reading, soft music, watching TV.
Hot
I'll
shower
let you
after hard
know.
days. Go ahead, Gary. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'll let you know when I figure it out.
Sometimes I maybe just watch TV for a few minutes, but the trouble is with the I have trouble picking out something on Netflix or whatever it is, and before I can pick out something, I'm asleep. So
That's good.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna say a shower after a day in the yard working.
oh yeah, that'll work. Have you ever faced something difficult and then discovered, and perhaps much later, that God was clearly working on everything out behind the scenes? What was it? Anybody have something they share? So,
I would say all the time, but I can't think of anything specifically this morning.
yeah, that's true. I had it wasn't something difficult necessarily, but I gave a speech at an AES thing on energy, and then one of the people there wanted to have lunch. So I mean, we scheduled lunch yesterday, and it was interesting because it's the first time I met him, and we were having lunch, and he asked to pray, and I thought, well, for me, anytime God just kind of out of the blue brings another Christian into my business dealings, I'm going, that's kind of a little blessing. But then it turns out that he has 3 children, and 2 of them have cystic fibrosis, and so I was able to share with him about Leah, and so it was. Although we were talking about energy and lighting, it was kind of an emotional conversation too. So it's just, I'm just amazed when God brings those things together like that.
We refer to that as a God thing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we talked about that. So what do people usually think of someone who toots his or her own horn?
Missing the point.
Yeah. Or narcissistic, or yeah, a lot of things.
And it comes
Thinks
from
thou protest too much.
Yeah,
It's
That never
usually the
happens in
least
Washington.
never have.
Yeah,
Never had what?
it's usually the least competent person that does that.
Yeah. All right, Rick, this is yours.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna trade.
Yeah,
Wait
the
till you
font-
see yours,
font
Steve.
got me a little bit
Yeah.
worried. All right, here we go. Chapter 6 contains the second of 2 episodes that intervene between the first and the second banquets of Esther. It therefore prolongs suspense, but it also resolves previous elements and anticipates future elements in the story. In particular, it resolves the incongruity that Mordecai was not rewarded for his earlier act of loyalty to the king, and deals with the recently raised tension between Haman and Mordecai. It anticipates coming events because this chapter is the turning point of the narrative. From these events onwards, the fortunes of the Jewish people as a whole will change for the better, and Mordecai's honor here prefigures that corporate experience. The chapter has been described as the most ironically comic scene in the entire Bible, and one of the funniest anywhere in the Bible. It presents a vivid drama where the rivalry and tension between the 2 main characters is visibly acted out. The irony is not without purpose. It marks a place where, for the first time, the scales tip in favor of Mordecai against Haman. The irony is necessary in order to emphasize the unlikely nature of this outcome, which is secured through unexpected and unplanned coincidence. and the providence of God. A number of contrasting themes reach their climax here: shame versus honor, planning versus coincidence, during desiring versus deserving. It is previously exalted Haman, who is the butt of the prolonged joke. He plans to titillate his desire or royal-like honor, but he receives nothing but extreme humiliation. He who has previously delighted in his peak finds he has only devised his own downfall.
Oh, okay, Steve, there's
Makes me think of Esther the musical.
Mhm.
Like, how come they haven't made this into a play or something,
Yeah,
right? Or a
yeah.
musical?
Yeah,
After reading what Rick just read.
Yeah.
I think it's been many, many plays and many musicals. A lot of
Listen.
authors take on the stories of the
Right.
Bible and just change them around a bit.
Yep. All right. That night the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? The king asked. Nothing has been done for him, his attendants answered. The king said, Who is in the court? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows he had erected for him. His attendants answered, Haman is standing in the court. Bring him in, the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him, What should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought to himself, Who is there that the king would rather honor than me? So he answered the king, For the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on his head. Then let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horses through the city streets, proclaiming before him, This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Go at once, the king commanded Haman. Get the robe and the horse and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew who sits at the king's gates. Do not neglect anything you have recommended. So Haman got the robe and the horse. He robed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief. He told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, Since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin. While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther had prepared.
oh, wow, this is quite a story in the book of Esther and in the Bible. So, I've got a number of things, there's patterns and all kinds of neat things in this book, and I'm going to read about that in a minute, but I did find I was kind of using old technology here, some on the Susa, the city keeps coming up in some of this, and so I wanted to know if there was anything about this. So I'm going to just read a few facts about it from an archaeological study that, I mean, they found the city. It was back in the late 1800s, and so they've still been working and uncovering things. So Diua Lafoy or something that was one of the archaeologists, aided by his wife, discovered the palace fortress with which the writer of the book of Esther calls the citadel of Susa. It covered 132 acres for the palace, was raised high above the surrounding city and was made up of the throne room, the royal palace, the harem, along with the inner and outer courts, the palace garden, pylons, stairways, terraces, and a few archways. The throne room was a great hypostyle hall which covered nearly an acre of ground. It had 36 columns, 6 rows of 6 each, with capitals carved on the form of the bulls kneeling back to back, and by a long cedar of Lebanon beams spanning the great distance between the massive columns. Here came the king when he sat on the throne of the kingdom, and here were held his banquets and state social events, such as the prolonged banquet described in the first chapter of the book of Esther. The floor of the throne room was a pavement of red and blue and white and black marble, just as it had been described in the book of Esther. Across the marble floor had walked the beautiful Queen Esther at the risk of her life as she approached the crimson canopied throne, stopping before the carpet, which only the feet of the king were allowed to tread, there to intercede for the lives of her people. So anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting. And so then banquets and feasts figures quite heavily in this book too. The mista is a Hebrew word that's translated as banquet or feast in the NIV. The word appears in the book of Esther 20 times and only 24 times in the rest of the Old Testament. As several commentators have noted, the story of Esther both begins and concludes with a pair of feasts, with other pairs of feasts intervening. In chapter 1, Xerxes gives 2 consecutive feasts. In chapter 9, the Jews observe 2 consecutive feast days to celebrate their deliverance. These 2 pairs of feasts mirror each other. For instance, Xerxes' first feast is for the nobility throughout the empire. The first of the Purim feast days is celebrated by the Jews throughout the empire. Xerxes' second feast is for the residents of Susa. The second day of Purim feast is celebrated by the Jews residing in Susa. So here you see the Xerxes banquet for the nobles of the empire, Xerxes banquet for all men of Susa, and that's one pair. And then we see Esther's coronation banquet, and here's another singular one, feasting in celebration of Mordecai's promotion. And then we see here where we are with Esther's first banquet, and then Esther's second banquet for the king and Haman. And then that ends with the first day of Purim feasting throughout the empire, and the second day of Purim feasting throughout Susa. So I thought that was kind of interesting. These 2 pairs that mirror each other. There's a lot. On the next slide, I'm going to go over the pluses and minuses. I mean, it's just to me, it was kind of fascinating. It may not be that interesting, but I found it interesting. So peripety, I mean, a lot of you guys probably knew these big words. I didn't. It's a literary term that refers to a sudden turn of events in the story that reverses the intended and expected action. So how would I say that word? Chiastic structure of reversals in Esther. So chiasm is where each element of a chiasm not only correspond to its parallel, but in reverse order. So in chapter 3, the king gives Haman his ring. In chapter 8, he gives Mordecai the same ring. I should announce this is a spoiler alert. So in chapter 3, Haman summons the king's scribes. And here in chapter 8, Mordecai summons the king's scribes. So in chapter 3, letters were written and sealed with a ring. In chapter 8, letters were written and sealed with the same ring. In chapter 3, the Jews, even women and children, to be killed on one day. And in chapter 8, the enemies, even women and children, to be killed on one day. And then we have Haman's decree publicly displayed as law. That's the one to destroy all Jews. Mordecai's decree displayed publicly as a law. So couriers go out in haste, couriers go out in haste. The city of Susa is bewildered. The city of Susa rejoices. Mordecai wears sackcloth and ashes. Mordecai wears royal robes. Mordecai goes through the city crying. Mordecai led through the city in honor. Xerxes advises Mordecai's wife, advises Mordecai's about regarding, she's the one that kind of came up with killing Mordecai and building the
Gallows.
gallows, yeah. Zeresh predicts her husband's ruin. So I thought this was kind of interesting. So I realize it's maybe a spoiler alert, but anyway, so these reversals is just kind of amazing. Okay. So in this first part here, what do you think is the pivotal event that reverses things in Esther?
Rekindled memory.
Yeah, reading the king a bedtime story.
About himself.
Yeah, about himself. But this is not the commentary made some thing about this. Normally you would think if there's a protagonist and antagonist, there would be some major conflict in the history or in the event which caused things to turn around. But here this is kind of just not very eventful. He's just being read a bedtime story, but this actually changes the whole course of everything that was planned to kill the Jews, exterminate the Jews, actually. So it all can be right here at this the first part of Esther. So what might be keeping the king from sleeping? Remember, he just came from a banquet with Esther.
A bit of undigested beef.
Yeah, that could be it. Or I don't know, some
He's getting up peeing a lot.
There you go.
yeah. Well, somebody said, well, maybe it was Haman building that gallows, because that's 75 feet tall, remember, and it was built in apparently one day, because maybe that was keeping the king up. But like I said, I think, if he was reading that story, and then he probably couldn't go back to sleep when he realized that he hadn't honored Mordecai. And typically the kings of the time, they would, if somebody did something good for the king or something especially, they would give them a great honor or recognize them throughout the kingdom. And so that was basically done so that the king would be building allies and people in case things went south somewhere. So what is Haman's position in the king's court? Just asking you to kind of recall where he's at now.
The right-hand man, isn't he?
Yeah, right. He's number 2 in the kingdom. And he has all the money and wealth and everything that anybody other than the king might have. He's got it all. So,
But he doesn't have Mordecai's head.
yeah, doesn't have Mordecai's head. He doesn't have he's not able to wear kingly robes. This kind of ties into kind of what he's asking for, because he thinks it's for him. Because
Mordecai is revered more by the king than he is.
yeah. So for him, it's all about appearance and recognition and honor and people paying him homage and everything else. So how do you think Mordecai felt about not being recognized for saving the king's life?
Hard to tell.
Yeah, so he was, high up in the king's court, but he just never received recognition for, the king never sent him a thank you note or anything. But
it was his chip in the big game.
Right.
It was something he could use.
Yeah, but he would have to mention it
Yep.
to the king. Yeah. But again, I think what the commentators wanted to make a comparison on how Haman was all about himself and getting noticed and everything else, and they wanted to show Mordecai as maybe being more humble, even though he was would be. I mean, a normal person might be disgruntled that he didn't even get a gift card or anything, but he still stayed on. He still did his job like he was supposed to do, even though he didn't get the honor that maybe he thought he might have. I don't think, like again, Mordecai was certainly more humble than Haman, so I think that's how he kind of dealt with it. So that's what we're kind of talking. How does a forgotten event suddenly become hugely significant?
Turns the tables on Mordecai's future.
Yeah.
So do you think the king understood the edict to kill all the Jews? Do you think he was aware of it?
The king comes across here as a bumbling idiot. I mean, all through Esther. He comes across as somebody else is actually driving the ship, but he's the one with the scepter.
Yeah.
Oh, it sounds very familiar. But
It does. I wasn't going to fill that in. I was going to let that be filled in by others.
yeah, yeah,
That's the spoiler alert.
yeah. There you go. So, yeah, he was that. So, what was the king feeling? I guess I can't write here. What was the king feeling that he had overlooked what Mordecai has done? How was the king feeling that he'd overlooked what Mordecai had done?
He was moved by it. He felt bad, obviously. He's going to
Yeah.
try to make up for it.
Yeah,
And his number one man had some great ideas to make that happen.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and so it's all kind of coincidental too, because Haman was kind of hanging out. I guess I don't know what he was doing. I would think he might have been supervising the building that gallows, but King asked his attendants to go out and see who's in the court. And again, this was I guess it met in the room or something. It was a very, very large building, especially, and the throne room too.
So the king never seems to come up with anything by himself.
Yeah,
To Greg's point, bumbling idiot. You know, like even with his old queen, he didn't know what to do with her, so he asked his, whatever, his advisors.
Yep.
And same thing here. He asked Haman, "Hey, what should I do for this person?"
yeah. What else can we discern about Haman's character through his response to the king's question in Esther 6-7? So when Haman entered, the king asked him, "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Now Haman thought to himself, "Who is there that a king would rather honor than me?" So he answered the king, "For the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn." And again, he wants the king's robe, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on his head. Then let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor and lead him on the horse through the city, proclaiming before him, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." So what?
This is
what-
hilarious.
Yeah. So what do we learn about Haman here? Anything else?
Anytime there's a conversation, it's about me.
Yeah. Yeah.
All about him.
Yeah. Okay. How might Haman have been feeling when he discovered that Mordecai, his enemy, is the one to be honored?
As Charlie Brown would say, good grief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then as I was reading this, and I was thinking back to that little video that everybody's seen or sent out with, the drawings. And you see, when Haman is leading Mordecai on I just remember this picture from the drawings on the horse, and he's got a big scowl on his face, he's having to go through town with Mordecai and say, no, this guy is the king is honoring. So
I mean, leading him on the horse is one thing, but for him to be proclaiming this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.
Yeah.
Oh,
Did Mordecai have to lead him around, or could he have picked somebody?
oh, you mean
Haman?
Haman?
I'm sorry, Haman. Yeah.
No, he wanted there's one of his high-ranking princes or something in the kingdom. It's what the king wanted.
Because that was the problem. I mean, if he would have just picked somebody
Right.
else to take him around, he could have dodged this bullet.
Right, right.
Maybe led down the back alleys and side streets.
Yeah. All right.
This is a great story, actually. If you think about it, with a superhero and a birthright person, and then the villain, it's all here.
Yeah.
And then you
Yep.
got a beautiful woman in the middle of it. It's like it's made for a movie.
Yeah, I'm surprised somebody hasn't taken this and done something with it. Of course, we probably couldn't encourage anybody to do that right now with the writer's strike, but other than that,
Yeah.
it is a fascinating story and just made for Hollywood.
Yeah.
I tell you, it's been done. The Bible gets used all the time.
Yeah. So Haman sought comfort from his wife and friends after his ride through the city with Mordecai, but he receives a very different response. How do his wife and advisors interpret the situation and react to Haman? So I'll read this again. Afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief and told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that happened to him. His advisors and his wife said to him, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin.
So what? I mean, I'm kind of confused by that statement by his wife.
The Jewish heritage
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, I mean,
doesn't make any sense.
right. I'm like, well,
Why
they
would
just
they be afraid of that?
right. They just passed a decree to have them all killed.
Yeah,
I mean, that's why I'm wondering, did the king know what Haman had done? Because he could have just said, hey, we have an edict out to kill all the Jews, and Mordecai's a Jew. You sure you want to parade him around the city? That's conflicting with your, whatever, your edict. Just strange.
Well, the king didn't know he was a Jew, did he?
apparently not. I mean,
I think
Yeah, but this
I
implies
think
that
would've been-
everybody knew.
that
This
would make the
implies
difference.
everybody knows.
Yeah, it's just bizarre.
I think everybody did know.
Yeah.
It's just that all he was he was a character on the chess piece for the king. He didn't care. The king would have been surrounded by all kinds of different cultures and people.
Right.
So I'm going to parade you around the city, and then I'm going to kill you.
Well, I don't think he connected the dots there.
I don't think he did either.
no. Well, again, he could be kind of totally out of it, like someone else we know. So
And then he gets back and he's off to a banquet with Esther, who's really going to hit him over the head with a hammer.
yeah. Again, so how does his wife Zeresh, and I'm not sure whether we can really pick up on this, but how do they seem to be distancing themselves from Haman?
They're looking for a new horse to
Yep.
hook their wagon to.
Yeah. As Haman is rushed off to Esther's second banquet, how do you think his expectations and feelings might have changed since the first one?
Mm.
Because remember the first one, he came home to Zeresh and his wife and all his friends and says, boy, the king thinks I'm really special because he invited me to this special banquet with the queen. And not only that, he's going to invite me again tomorrow. So none of the other princes or the people on the council, if you will, were invited. It's just me. So,
But dang it, if Mordecai didn't worship me, he still was mad.
yeah. So I've got in I'm looking at the time. Oh, we got plenty of time. And there's some things to think about, but I got some other questions here at the end.
Well, moving, I'm not going in spoiler alert here, but the king has made his decree where they're going to be killing the Jews, and he can't back up on that.
Yeah. That's right.
And so he's got some difficult times coming for himself on how he works around that decree without reversing it, because he can't.
Right. And it might be one of those things where when he starts finally comes aware and puts two and two together, he's probably causing him a lot of sleepless nights now that he realizes it.
Yeah.
So an aside, but why is it that power can never change its mind and it's seen as a weakness? Because this happens all throughout the Bible. And it's stated that, well, if the decision was made, you can't change the decision. That would show weakness. And you're going, how is that? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Even God changed his mind.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, well, that's true usually in even in our government or something. Once we get something set in stone or a law made, so well, no, we can't change that. It's law, which would it would seem no, you can change that. But
The way we always did it. We've always done it that way.
Yeah.
They're egocentric people. They're just,
yeah,
they're never going to admit that they may have made a mistake. So they hang on to that, even though they're dead wrong.
Yeah, but holding the theme of this, king that is just listening to advisors for every step he makes. This situation where once you make a decision, you can't pull it back or it will show weakness, doesn't come from the king. That comes from the people around the king that are trying to force any leader to act on something, even if it was a uninformed decision or they were tricked. And so that position, if I was a king, I'd go, I'm a king, I can do whatever I want.
yeah,
But yet
Right.
this decision, obviously, and this statement that, oh, well, you'll show weakness if you change your mind, isn't of the king, it's of the people around the king. I don't know, it's just
yeah,
an observation.
That's
Yeah,
I mean,
that's-
that's a good point, because even if he changes his mind, he's still the king,
Right.
Well,
look at how it was with John the Baptist. That was a proven point.
oh yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah.
Because Herod made that promise and then
Right. He couldn't go back on it.
right.
well, I didn't mean somebody's head when I said
Right.
up to half the kingdom. So
Right.
Well, I didn't mean his head. It was a fill in the blank, I'll do what you want.
And he's
Exactly.
thinking riches, right? I have all this stuff I can give you, right?
Yeah.
He wasn't thinking.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll move on to the, I think we've got time. I can read the thing, some things to think about, because there was some conclusions. Maybe we'll come back to these questions.
So
So again,
just a curious thing. I don't know if you guys have ever used the Tyndale Verse Finder. It's kind of an old paper version of a way to look things up, and it's got categories like abortion, abuse, accountability, adoption, faith, all kinds of things.
What's it called?
And it's called Tyndale Verse Finder. I think you guys have heard of Tyndale
Yeah.
Press.
yeah,
Yeah, they've been around forever.
Mhm.
And it's a way to find something. You got kind of a general idea, but you can't remember the verse, or you can't remember where it came from. So there are hundreds of books and verses referenced in this thing. Esther is the only one that isn't in this.
Interesting.
In other words, yeah, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry for the aside. But I thought
No,
it was-
that's all right. No, that's good. Let me, I'll read through this, and then there may stimulate some more questions, but, so this was,
I'm assuming they have an app for your phone, I would think, right, Greg?
I would assume so.
Okay.
I've only seen it. It's usually, it's in the backs of study
Right.
Bibles and stuff.
Right.
yeah, I've got something similar to Thompson. It's an old Bible I've had, but Thompson chain reference, so you can go
Yeah,
down and look at basically any topic, and that's actually how I found the archaeological thing on Susa.
Susa.
Yeah. So I had to go back to the paper. So in spite of having all the power of the Persian Empire at his disposal, Haman's carefully laid plans were turned against him simply because the king had a sleepless night. The author is suggesting that beneath the surface of human decisions and actions is an unseen and uncontrollable power at work, which can be neither explained nor thwarted. In ancient polytheistic culture, the gods controlled fate. With a pantheon of competing gods and goddesses, human affairs could be turned upside down if one god overpowered the other. Kind of like a Marvel Universe thing. So fate was therefore capricious, because one could never be sure which god or goddess was in control of one's situation. The author of Esther wrote from the perspective of the Jews, who were monotheistic. By constructing this story using that word I've said before, peripety, what is the divinely inspired author of Esther trying to say about how God rules? If there is but one God, does he change his mind from day to day or week to week, making human events lead first in one direction and then in another? Read in a polytheistic context, the story suggests that Yahweh, the God of the Jews, had overpowered Haman's gods in this instance. Read from a monotheistic perspective, the story explains the reversal of fortune, not as an ongoing tug of war between gods, but as consistent with the powerful word of the one true God. The author of Esther implies a consistency in God's rule of human history that is based on his word, not on circumstances. Regardless of how circumstances appear, God is ruling history according to the ancient covenant he made with Israel at Sinai. The reversal of destiny began when the king had a sleepless night implies that despite their sin and despite their location away from Jerusalem, God's promise to Israel made at the beginning of their nation still stood. God was not capricious like the gods of the pagans. He was not locked in some struggle with other deities that gave him control only to certain days or in certain situations. All that had happened was consistent with the stated provision of God's covenant. The Agagites would be destroyed, even though they seemed inviolable in their wealth and power. Previously in Israel's history, God had used mighty miracles to deliver his people and to fulfill his promises. In the story of Esther, God was using the ordinary events of life to realize his covenant promises to his people. He used even seemingly insignificant events, such as the king's sleepless night, and the decisions of less than perfect people to fulfill, nevertheless, the promises of his ancient covenant. Previously in Israel's story, God had used, I copied that same thing twice. I wonder if I meant to do that.
Must be important.
Yeah.
Yeah, must be important. So anyway, so any thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, it does point to the fact that God can use anything to change the fortunes of man.
That he is in control, even if it seems like these things are just happening, or like it's just a coincidence, or just it's just serendipity kind of thing. Let me go back to some of these questions. Any of these questions spark any comment from you? How has God worked in your own life, often through events that were unexpected and seemed insignificant at the time? Or in your life, where do you see the fickle finger of fate or the holy hand of God? How do you know the difference? And in stressful situations, why are we inclined to take on situations ourselves, disregarding God or failing to look for his providential hand in circumstances? And I'll go back to that lunch I had yesterday with that young man. I think, he's got three children. Two of them do have cystic fibrosis, and with cystic fibrosis, there has to be, the two parents have to be carriers, and then with each pregnancy, I think there's a 50% chance that one of the kids will have cystic fibrosis. And so he, as he was telling me, he didn't know that he and his wife were both carriers because there'd never been cystic fibrosis in any of their families, or that anybody knew of. But so this was kind of unusual, and so we were able to talk too about I mentioned a couple years ago about this new drug that came out that's like $3,000 hit, and the Leah's, but she gets it through some government program, and his kids are on it. And typically the drug's helping Leah, but it's much better than what they say when it started early, when the kids are younger. So it almost can kind of reverse the impacts on a person's life. So, I think this was just just out of the blue. I had no idea of this young man's background and or what was going on in his life until we sat down to lunch, and the conversation just ended up going in that direction. So that's one recent example. So that event those things were unexpected, and it seemed insignificant at the time, but it was also kind of an emotional launch for both of us. So I don't know, we're sitting there in squealers, and two guys kind of tearing up a little bit here and there. So and then I was also shared with him in follow-up email. I mentioned, that Lee has cystic fibrosis. I think she turns 50 this year. And then I also mentioned in the email that about Leah's pregnancy, that she did have a baby, and although her CF doctor said she needed to have an abortion, because it would kill Leah and the kid would probably not be all right. So anyway, so that was, yeah, very, very recent thing to me. So so any other comments from anybody on these questions?
With regards to question 3, the last person I think of when my flight gets canceled is God.
Yeah,
And that's typically ends up being a stressful situation for me, or you're going to miss your connecting flight, and that's something, that's one thing I never like to do is fly because I'm not in control, right?
yeah.
And I think some of you guys can probably agree with me there.
Yeah, exactly.
But rather than looking at, okay, the flight's canceled, let's make the best of it, I usually stress on it way too much.
Or there was a reason.
Right.
Number 3, I think of the book of Jonah, the prodigal prophet. God was great until God wanted him to do something he didn't want to do. And so then instead of doing it, he runs away.
Right.
And so it's a stressful situation for him. So he says, he disregards God and continually goes 2,000 miles in the opposite direction of Nineveh.
Yeah, and and he's such a reluctant prophet, and he's even kind of pissed that God doesn't kill those people.
Yeah.
Well, what? I told them about the good news or whatever, and they accepted, they believed it and they accepted it.
And you want me to go down to Nineveh? Are you nuts?
Yeah. You know what those people are doing over there? Be like sending some of us to San Francisco or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Anyone else? Some comments on this?
Regarding question 1, I have an experience where I was in Muncie doing my job as Chief Information Officer, and a new superintendent comes in and says she wants me to do something else on data because I'm good with data. And I was really content in Muncie. I love the place. I'm going to retire there, I said to myself. But she pestered me so much, I decided to leave. I came to Indianapolis and I'm taking twice my salary. So God uses people. Adversities come in our way and sometimes we fight it, but God uses people. Same in Esther. God uses people for you to get to an end. You'd never know who it was. In this case, God used my boss to kick me out for me to leave Muncie. And now I'm doing way better than I was in Muncie. So yeah, that's a personal experience.
Wow. Yeah. See,
Good for you.
God is in the details. I mean, he's worked. Yeah, there's so many. I think as you think, the rest of you maybe. I'm sure we all have stories like this where, as we think about, it just seems like details or this person or that person, but when you go back and you really ponder over the events and the cycle that happened, you see God is there all along. And I know I shared this story too, is when I went several interviews up in Madison, Wisconsin, for with an energy group up there, and so we were going up for the final interview before the offer, and we'd set. I think back then Susan and I had talked, and we thought, well, okay, if everything's cool, I think we can do this for $80,000 would be the amount of money that we can get. So we go up there, we go through. I mean, the head of that division and took us around, even showed us his own house. I mean, and we had made plans with the realtor and everything else. And so, they feed us and everything else. And I think we had Abby with us at the time too, because nobody couldn't have anybody babysit her for some reason. I don't know what the thing is. So anyway, we go through this a whole day, and then at the end of the day, I went in and finally and talked to them, and they gave me the offer, and it was $79,000. And so then Susan and I come out to the car, we're going, God, what the hell? I mean, does that mean is that close enough to 80,000? What should we do? And so we pondered about that on the drive back, and then we talked and prayed about it, and I said, it's close, but it's not what God said was what we should go for. I mean, he gave us that $80,000 number. And then so I turned down that job, and then several months later, I was reading an article in one of the energy publications, and it was this guy that was head of that area. It was the article was written by the former director of the Madison Energy Group. Going, wow, we passed a bullet, because I then called up there, and the person I would have been working directly for under this guy says, no, he's gone, and I'll be gone in 2 weeks. And I'm going, I mean,
Wow.
God does those things, and it's so amazing. And I'm sure throughout the day, I mean, and I understand that now. Throughout the day, I'm sure God's doing little things. He's smoothing the way. I mean, you may not think God cares about that, but when I think about things, I mean, God loves his children, you love your children, and you just do little things for them to make their life easier to do something. And so, I mean, that's what Susan and I have seen that so many times. And I know he's out there doing that for all of us.
It was funny. I was listening to Tony's story, and I was wondering how many times I have been that boss that caused someone to make a change, move a different direction, and not even know it. And that I've been used by God in that way.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's happened too, which is, a different way to look at these things. But the reality of it.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm convinced all the stories you have that, I mean, God has a plan for us. I mean, my ending up in Indianapolis many years ago, if you would have asked me, at one time in my life, I would have told you were nuts that I was ever going to go to Indiana and Indianapolis. And not only just going to Indianapolis, but then working for the company I worked for, and then moving to Fishers, and then end up in Zionsville, end up at Christ Church, end up in the men's Bible study. And here I am all these years later, and we're on Zoom still together with you guys. I mean, God has a plan.
Yeah.
It continues. And even with Tony, I knew Tony as a student, and we became good friends, and he worked his way hard through life, and he's achieved, and I'm proud of him, really proud of him.
Yeah.
And that's another one. Tony is one but God puts those people in your place, and you got to look back and say, I really personally didn't have a whole lot to do with that. It was the people who were put in front of me, and he put in front of me, that changed my life.
Yep.
Yeah, God is amazing. And I think, you just, you need, I think, and I think as you go through life, I mean, it finally took me a while to realize, that was God saying this. That was God just reaching out and touching my life in somewhere as a kind of a reminder that he's always there for us. So,
I mean, I said this because of the book of Esther. Throughout the last 3 weeks, God is using the Esther, kings, other people who are self-conceited. So that I'm going to reread the book of Esther, because it's interesting how so many characters are being used to achieve so many goals. Some of them don't know, some of them are known. I mean, little men, big men, women, every character is being used in the book of Esther to achieve a certain goal. And if you don't read deep, you can never get the meaning of it. So it's an interesting topic we picked the last 3 weeks or 4 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, Tony, there's some stuff at the beginning of this you need to look at when you get the PDF. It shows the parallels, the reversals, and I don't know whether you came in on that part or not, but
All right.
Well, you talk about one thing I came to mind, I didn't say it at the time, but with the king not changing his mind. Well, we do the same thing with the Constitution.
But the
If-
Constitution
if-
has several amendments. I mean, it's designed to be changed.
But when you hear somebody say, I mean, politicians use it to say it can't be changed. It's in the Constitution.
is that a bad thing?
No, I'm not even being negative about it, but I'm saying that when you reach a pinnacle point, either in royalty or in politics or in leadership, it's very difficult to change a decree. I mean, if you're a CEO and you make a decree to your company, it is very hard to go in and say, you know what, you screwed up. We need to change that.
Yeah, no, there's some things coming, some pending legislation and things that it surprises me. You heard me talk about the ESG, which is gonna end up becoming a credit score for corporations, and it's based on the environmental, but if you get into the details, I mean, they're using it in Europe and some other countries extensively, and IU Health is looking at it too, but it's not just an energy plan. And just so you guys know, we need to be good to the environment, but it's not an existential crisis. The world's not going to end because we continue to drive cars. It's not going to end because if we continue to have gas cooking. So that's going to be put in as legislation unless some things change. And then there also, and there will also, you'll have something similar personally too, much like China does, a social credit score. I mean, you look at, it's supposed to be an environmental thing, ESG, but you look at the societal and it's all based, there's a lot of how woke is your company kind of questions. So anyway, sorry, I'm got off on a rant, so I'll so how's Dick doing?
Oh, he's doing really well. He had a cardiologist appointment yesterday. Now, that didn't have anything to do with his stroke, but Carol called, his wife, and said that he got a very, very good report. His heart is very good, very strong. He has a moderate valve leakage, but that's something they're just monitoring. It's nothing to be concerned about. The doctor is very impressed, although they don't deal with the stroke, very impressed with his recovery, and said it's just going to take a while, but you're going to get there. And so it was all positive for Dick yesterday.
Okay, great. Greg, when does Anna have that infusion? Or was it last week or?
No, it's next week.
Okay.
It's next week.
And of course, we lost Larry, and that was a courageous battle he went through. We were fortunate enough to be with both of them on Sunday prior to his dying, and had a good conversation with him, had great prayers with him. We even sang songs with him, and he had tears in his eyes, but he was okay. You know, you could just tell. He just shook his head. He was at peace with what was happening, and that was pretty special.
Yeah.
He
Any other-
passed away on his wedding anniversary.
Yep, 48.
Okay, any other updates or anything new?
We could add Debbie to the list. She's on crutches again with her arthritis. She had a knee replacement about probably a couple years ago, and now they're going to have to do the other knee. It's bone on bone, and so she's on crutches, not getting around very well. And when you schedule a surgery like that today, it isn't like next week. It's going to
Right.
be, she's got to wait till October.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, and Debbie, anything else? Okay, let's spend a moment in prayer here. Dear Heavenly Father, I just thank you for these men and this journey we're on, and Esther, and that we're able to go through this together on where you lead us. It's always look forward to what do you have planned for us? What's next in our lives, and even in our Bible studies. This is a great journey you have us on, and we're truly thankful for that. Thank you again for these men and their consistency and their participation and their insights as they feed into my life and each other's lives. Thank you, God.
Thank you, God.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, God.
Thank you, God.
Thank you, God.
Heavenly Father, we just ask you be with those on our list. We're thankful that Larry is now home and safe with you. We ask you be with Anna and her situation, and just ask that the infusion goes well, and that it brings the healing and restoration that she needs. We ask you to be with Debbie, just to bring her comfort and freedom from pain until they can get that surgery done. Just help her with her mobility, and just let her feel your presence. And Father, we also ask, we've got a kind of a turmoil coming up as we move into 2024, and in our country, there's all kinds of stuff going on, and we're just hopeful and praying that you're acting behind the scenes much as you did in Esther. Please continue to let us feel your presence. We ask for your blessings, your protection, your covering for us and for our families. We ask all these things in the name of Yeshua HaMashiach. Amen.
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 Thanks, Dwight.
Thanks,
Thank you,
God.
Dwight.
Have a good day.
You do the
All
same.
righty.
Good weekend.
Take
Yeah,
care,
Tony, you
everybody.
look so nice. You add a little class to our group.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I appreciate that comment.
I don't think that was directed to you, Gary.
Oh, here I am in my t-shirt sitting here.
Yeah, me too. So
I think in a backhand